Hello and welcome. We are so delighted to have you join us today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to spend a little time with us today. My name is Sheila Caldwell, and I am the president and founder of the Heart2Heart Foundation. And today we are so excited to bring you this special webinar that's part of our Saving the Saviors program for first responders. You may recall about a year ago, we began working on this new program for first responders. It was developed in memory of a friend of ours, Ed Holler, and his brother Dean and their family had approached the Heart2Heart Foundation wanting to do something special for our first responder community. And of course, since we lost Ed tragically at a young age in his early 50s to a heart attack, we wanted to bring not only the physical about heart health awareness and lifestyle management, but also we knew that mental health is a big component of our overall health, especially our heart health. So as our Saving the Saviors program team have met and worked on this program over the last year, we kept coming back to that mental health component and how important that was. A couple of months ago, we actually began working with South Carolina Thrives, who's also part of the Saving the Saviors program team, about their mental health first aid, which is available to first responders, dispatchers, teachers, and healthcare professionals at no charge. And you can get that information on our website. Today, this program is very unique because this program is for the families of the first responders, for spouses, for the significant others, caregivers, could be the parents of a first responder, because we know typically you're going to share in those day-to-day burdens, but you're also the person who's probably going to figure out when there's something that's not going right and can seek out help. So hopefully today you're going to get some great information. I know you will, because we are so honored to have another of our Saving the Saviors program team members, Betsey O'Brien from NAMI Piedmont Tri-County, who is going to present today, Helping Our Hurting Heroes. So welcome, Betsey.
All right, well, thank you, Sheila. I'm really excited to be here. One of the things I want to say as a little disclaimer is I'm not a doctor, I'm not a therapist. I am someone who has a lived family experience of having a son who lives with a mental health condition. And so he was diagnosed very, very young. So we learned quickly, and we just kind of sucked in as much information so we could be a good partner for him and a good support. So one of the things that this whole team feels strongly about is that we acknowledge the challenging and often dangerous work that our first responders experience, providing us a safety net here in the community while they do their work. So we want to return the favor and give you, their loved one and supporter, some information that might be useful in sort of toning down the temperature, or, pumping up the support and putting a safety net under our first responders. As we know, our first responders are exposed to crisis and trauma every day in their lines of work. This can cause major sleep issues, schedules that they have, shift work that they experience that is different than, the typical job or typical career. It can cause irritability, anxiety, depression, PTSD, among other things. And that doesn't even take into account the typical struggles that families can often have with relationships with family, in-laws, any of that kind of stuff, finances, and perhaps even parenting. So have this stressful job and then laying all this other stuff on top can be really, really a struggle. So today we have a short agenda of information that might help you help your first responder. And we're also really, really excited about 3 interviews that we have to share with you as well. So Sheila, if you wanted to cue up the PowerPoint, then we'll be good to go. Okay, so Helping Our Hurting Heroes, that's the name of this particular program. And as you can see, we're collaborating together here with Heart2Heart. Next slide, please. So here's our agenda. We're going to be talking about we're going to be talking about who is NAMI Piedmont Tri-County. Maybe if you've never heard of NAMI before. We're going to talk about communication with your first responder or healthcare worker, because they're frontline staff workers as well. Signs of anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress. What does that look like? And what are mental health conditions anyway? And statistics that you might need for your loved one. Suicide. We do need to talk about it. And lastly, but not in any way, the last thing we want to talk about and least important is self-care for you. That is obviously something that is really important. Next slide. Okay, so who is NAMI? Okay, our acronym actually stands for the National Alliance on Mental Illness. NAMI is the largest grassroots mental health organization that supports people living with a mental health condition and those families that love them. Okay, the hierarchy is there's a national organization, there's state organizations, every state has a state organization, and then there's affiliates, and our state, South Carolina, has 11. We are part of an affiliate that's called NAMI Piedmont Tri-County, and we support Chester, Lancaster, and York counties. Next slide, please. So what is our mission and our methods? What we do at NAMI is we offer no-cost support, education, and advocacy. And we do that in a number of ways. We have support groups. We have family support groups that meet once a week virtually now. We have support groups for individuals that live with a mental health condition, adults living with a mental health condition that meet once a week as well. We have family and peer education. We have a course called Family to Family, which will be coming up soon, and it really works with family members of adults that live with a mental health condition. We also have one for parents of children and adolescents. And again, all these are free of charge. Community programming, well, this is an example of some of the community programming that we offer. And presentations, we have specific presentations that we offer in different settings. In hospitals, we have presentations. We have presentations called Ending the Silence that we offer to teenagers. We have a different Ending the Silence program for teachers and for parents. So we want to make sure that everybody's getting the message as early as possible so people can find help and support for those they love. And we have webinars, again, like this one, and panel discussions for, corporations that maybe have a specific need, and we get a panel of 4 or 5 people and we can pull together a really nice program to meet the needs that they specifically ask for. Okay. And our next slide is going to be the first of our 3 guest speakers. It's Michael Ackerman. Michael is a retired law enforcement officer with 24 combined years of experience in different parts of the states. He lives currently in North Carolina, and he's working with Juvenile Court as a counselor, and he also is a trainer. So let's hear what Michael can share with us. Michael, I'd like you to introduce yourself.
My name is Michael Ackerman. I spent 14 years in law enforcement, started out in Arizona, and then moved back home to South Carolina in 2009. Spent a total of 8 years with the Charleston County Sheriff's Office, my final 8 years in law enforcement. I'm married. I have a beautiful daughter who is 12, who's special needs. And I currently live in the mountains of Western North Carolina.
Kind of share, some of the stressors you had and what was helpful.
Sure. I think one of the big things that a lot of new officers or first responders, for that matter, whether it be firefighter, EMT, or law enforcement, what they don't understand is the physiological toll that the job takes on you just from your normal day-to-day experiences. Your body is put through just an immense amount of stress from adrenaline dumps on a daily basis, multiple times a day, not just a daily basis, but on a multiple times a day. And those kinds of things really negatively affect your body, and I wasn't prepared for that. And then you add on top of that the mental stress of just the normal day-to-day of doing the job. I mean, you have to deal with death, and you have to, not only do you have to deal with death, but you have to basically objectify death so that you can get through and do your job. You have to be able to look at a dead body and be able to do a job. You can't become emotional about it. Not there. You know, you have to see the worst in people, and you can't become emotional about it. You have to stay objective. And you know, new people to this profession usually aren't warned about how that affects you, because it all affects you one way or another. You change in this line of work. And sometimes that change is very minimal. And sometimes that change is very extreme, depending on the type of person you are, your background, the type of career you have. But you will change. Their family member is going to go through it too, because they love them and they're going to go on that ride with them. And they didn't sign up for it. Your loved ones, they chose you. They didn't choose the job. That's your choice. That was my choice. That was our calling to do this type of profession. And our family members, you know, they have other callings and stuff, and their professions have stresses as well. And one way or another, I was exhibiting that, whether it be that I closed myself off from them, or maybe I was a little more emotional about something, or, you know, my humor went to the toilet. I mean, all first responders, we all have horrible senses of humor, and that's how we deal with the traumatic events. So that was something that I really think I wish I had had more knowledge about as I went into it. That's really the main thing. The other thing I would say, and it is more of a practical thing, probably beyond just the stresses of the job, the most stressful thing for first responder families is always finances. And I wasn't, you know, nobody really taught us about, you know, you need how to properly financially plan to alleviate the stress that your family is going to feel. Because, again, it's such a stressful type of career field anyway. We don't get paid very much money. And that creates even more stress. And then you have officers or firefighters who are working double shifts or triple shifts, or working 2 or 3 jobs, because they're living beyond, you know, their means, which then creates even more stress on top of an already stressful career field, which creates even more stress within the family. I always told my new trainees that don't ever use your overtime as part of your budget. Your budget is your base salary, and that's what you should plan your life around. Anything that you get above that should go into some sort of special fund for a vacation, or for, you know, something special within the family.
Can you offer some advice to family members as their law enforcement officer copes with the added stress of COVID-19 and the social unrest that has really become so, the social unrest really that kind of erupted since the beginning of the year, more than usual. But COVID, I mean, when you go on a call, you're not sure whether you're going to pick up something because someone may or may not be careful, or they may or may not be sick. So,
like that, there's always that risk. COVID is just another one on that plate. I don't think it's, we were always trained to treat people with respect, but also treat them as, you know, as potential carriers of something. So we, you know, be careful, use your PPE properly, and common just safety practices now. I think a lot of law enforcement officers are feeling attacked from all sides. I think they feel attacked from the media, which has been going on for a few years. Really started after Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. and has just kind of snowballed from there. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of false narratives placed out there about first responders. And it does place a tremendous amount of stress. I know that there are families who are taking extraordinary precautions right now as far as their own personal safety, removing stickers from their cars. If they have take-home vehicles, not necessarily parking them in front of the house, and taking more care. And those kinds of things, what we deal with at work is one thing, but when it directly affects your family's safety, that's a whole nother level of stress.
So I have another question for you that is a difficult one for law enforcement officers and other first responders. It's about acknowledging that you might have anxiety or depression. These are real things that happen to people in all professions. I understand that these professions it's very stigmatizing. Do you have any kind of take on that whole thing? I mean, how do you get around something like that?
The way around it is to talk openly about it. Mental health within the first responder community, of course, is a kind of a taboo subject. It has been for many, many years. Mm-hmm. First responders are the ones who are supposed to take care of other people. We're very A-type personalities. We don't believe that we need help ourselves, but in fact, we need help more than, any other profession out there. From my personal experience, for those who don't know, I was involved in a shooting in 2014. My partner was murdered. I was shot. And I had to kill the person who did all that. I live with PTSD now, and I say I live with it because I no longer suffer from it, but I do live with it every day. I did suffer from it. I almost killed myself twice soon after the incident occurred. Normalize talking about mental health, and the way you do that is to talk about it. It was my one incident that really kind of broke it was the straw that broke the camel's back for me. But you don't have to ever draw your weapon or see a partner get murdered or anything like that and not have the anxiety. And people don't understand that there's a thing called cumulative stress, or you could have one traumatic incident, Right. The cumulative is almost more dangerous because it changes you so slowly over time that you don't notice it.
Right.
The stress of just doing the job and seeing the things that you see every day. You may start out in law enforcement having one beer a week. 5 years down the road, you're having a beer a night. 10 years down the road, you're having 3 beers a night. Mm-hmm. And those subtle changes, you're not weak. If you talk about the fact that you had this one call that really shook you up and you can't sleep, or you keep seeing it over and over again, that's not weakness, that's strength when you're able to talk about it.
Exactly.
I'll share one quick story, which shows you that we have come a little bit of the way. Mm-hmm. Before I got out of law enforcement and after my incident, I remember I was in the squad room and I was talking with a sergeant and lieutenant. We were in the squad room and we were talking about things, and I don't know how the subject came up, but the subject came up about what medications you're on. And all three of us, who had never talked about this kind of stuff, the lieutenant, the sergeant, and myself, we were all taking anti-anxiety medications. And we were having the conversation as if we were talking about football.
I really, really appreciate the time that you have spent with me tonight. So is there anything else that you would like to share before we say goodnight?
No, just to remember to take care of yourselves, both physically and emotionally. Don't ignore one or the other. They're all just as important. Remember, have some sort of healthy outlet, whether it be working out or working gardening or working on automobiles, something non-first responder related that you can do to just kind of wash away whatever it is that you see every day and get your mind back into the normal world. So you can go out and not embarrass your spouse with some horrible joke or something.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate the time, Michael. Okay, all right. Well, one of the things that, it's wonderful to hear these personal stories. It just adds so much more to a presentation, when you hear from people who've been there and are able to really just share their feelings, their emotions, some of the things that they've gone through. So one of the things that Michael has Michael mentioned in his video was the importance of talking and communicating. So there's a lot of us that really don't remember how to listen. We do know how to do a lot of talking, but one of the things we want to do is we want to learn a little bit about being, honing our listening skills and making them a little bit better, and understanding some of the communication skills that would be helpful in drawing out some of the conversations that we want to have with our loved one. Okay, so we don't need to remember these names necessarily, but we're gonna give some examples of all of them. So there's reflective responses that are and emotional labeling, minimal encouragers, paraphrasing, open-ended questions, and I statements. So let's talk about emotional, reflective responses and emotional labeling. Okay, so what you want to do here is you want to be a really good listener, and you don't want to jump right in and respond to somebody right away after they start talking. So you want to be able to listen and listen to what your partner, your spouse, your family member saying. So after they talk a little bit and share a little bit, instead of you feeling like you need to solve problems or counter in some way, you go back to them and you say, you sound frustrated, you seem sad, you seem concerned, I hear that you feel angry. So these are some things where you can kind of say what you hear, and it would be giving them, again, an opportunity to say, now that's really not what I'm talking about, but it's a way for you to open up the communication and see what they have to say. Next slide. This is minimal encouragers. We do this all the time when we're talking on the phone. These are some skills that you can use, showing that you're listening, and especially when you're not face to face. We do this all the time when we're talking to a friend on the phone. You're talking to your mom, you're talking to, your sister, whatever. So in order to keep the conversation going and listen to what they're saying, you use things like, yeah, I see, okay, and go on, and yes, and all those things to just kind of let them know you're there, you're listening, and these are good things to remember. So this is some other ways to draw out the conversation, typically when you're not face to face. Paraphrasing. This is another way for you to reflect back what you're hearing to make sure you've got it right. So here's an example. The statement that your loved one, that's a first responder, might say is, I asked for help from the chaplain, my supervisor, work friends, and nobody was there for me. So you would paraphrase that, sum it up, and say, so you reached out to a lot of people, no one would help. So just kind of seeing if you're on the same page. Another one as an example that we can say is, my life sucks. I lost my girlfriend. I just missed an important meeting. What am I doing? And you can paraphrase that by saying, so your relationship's ended and you think things aren't going really well at work right now. It kind of sums it up, what they've just said, and kind of seeing if you're on the same page with them. Next slide. Open-ended questions. So these are things that you want to sort of format and form in your communication back to you, the person you love, that doesn't require a yes or no answer. Because sometimes we can kind of, all of us can clip someone off with a yes or no, and that's the end of it. So we want to encourage our partner to talk, and it helps them elaborate if you're not just getting the yes or no. All these things too work really, really well with youth. So, keep all these skills, sort of right up front. So, so here are some examples of how this might work with a question that isn't going to get our yes or no answer. So what happened after you came home? You know, that kind of thing would have an explanation. Why do you think he did that? Again, there would be some room for a real explanation, a conversation. And this is another big one too. How do you feel about that? You know, it gets them talking. So these are some ways to sort of form your conversation and ask questions without getting a yes or no answer. Okay, the next one is my favorite. You know, it's a really good one. This, if you were going to remember any of the names of them, I statements are a big one. So what they do is they convey your concerns in a non-defensive manner. We're not using the word, you always do this. It's how you feel, right? Emotions are high, so you want to tone it down. Maybe you feel like you're being attacked or singled out or, you know, dumped on, and you want to really refocus what's going on. So these are some examples of what I statements look like. So again, you want to take the you always do this, or you always leave that around, or you never pick up after yourself. So we're changing the frame, so we don't want to have, you know, because remember, emotions are high. So what you want to do is you want to say, I feel, and whatever emotion that is, when you state, and then you would state the behavior and concern you're talking about, and then you state the reason. So this is really how you feel, okay? And an example of that would be, I feel worried when you don't talk to me because I feel left out and confused. Okay, so that's an example of what an I statement would look like. Another one would be, I feel sad when there's fighting and tension in the house. We're not saying anything about you, which can always sort of, you know, get things escalated. You're letting them know how you feel. It's a really good way. Not a lot of talking after that. You just say it, and then kind of, you know, it kind of opens things up for them. So try to use those when you can, and in your conversations with your loved one. And our next second of 3 guest speakers are going to be telling their story, or a little bit about their story. And it's Katie and Randy Feltner. And Randy's actually a battalion chief at the NDWFD company from 20 to 21, and works as a certified personal trainer at King George Family YMCA and firefighter at the Colonial Beach Volunteer Fire Department near Washington, D.C. Let's hear what they have to say.
We are going to be joined by Randy Feltner and his wife, Katie. Randy is the Battalion Chief of Operations, Naval District, Washington Fire and Emergency Services in Indian Head, Maryland. So he is there in a huge area. And so welcome. We are so glad to have you.
Thank you.
So just as an introduction of the two of you, so people know your story, Randy, tell us your story, because you have such an incredible story, not only of survival, but of how you have used this experience to touch others over the years.
Okay, so almost 2 years ago now, October 11th, 2018, I was at work, and we went to the gym like we do every day, and was in, 10 or 15 minutes into our workout with our trainer, and the lights went out. And about 3.5 minutes later, I woke up. I had gone into cardiac arrest, and my own crew rushed, within seconds, and started doing what they're trained to do. I like to think I take full credit for their training, but they brought me back real quick, and I woke up, and all my guys are standing over top of me, and they didn't really tell me what happened. They just told me I was having a heart attack, and went on to the hospital. And then as the day went on, I kind of found out how, I was checked out for a few minutes and didn't have a pulse, and I would have never known it other than being a little sore. I felt fine afterwards. Probably a lot of that was just adrenaline, but the ironic thing is not when I first started being a firefighter, but not too long after, she kind of convinced me to get myself in shape, and since then been kind of the guy pounding my fist on desks saying, hey guys, let's get out of the recliners and go to the gym and work out. And kind of the one leading that. I'm the, I'm a wellness and fitness trainer for firefighters through the wellness and fitness program that the IAFF has set up. And, then I'm the one that has the heart attack on duty and goes into cardiac arrest. And, I survived that. And my wife let me have a pity party for myself for about 45 minutes. From then on, it was, hey, you're not dead. You're still here. Let's use that. And I didn't know if I was gonna be able to come back to work or not. Obviously, I just knew I was still alive and I wasn't gonna stop doing whatever I was doing. So we went, immediately. She's a trainer as well, so she put me to work in the gym and got me going slowly and back up the pace. And now other than the stents that are in my heart and the medicine I take every day, I would never know that I had a heart attack to start with, other than I constantly tell everybody about it at all times. So now we've kind of gone on the road and go and talk to different firefighters and different groups and spoke at churches and all these other places to kind of just spread the word that, how important it is to take care of yourself. And, and not only with that, but, what to do if something tragic does happen to you, because that's not easy to deal with either.
Randy, how long have you been a firefighter?
20 years. Been a volunteer for 20 years, and in year 17 as a paid firefighter.
So 20 years as a firefighter, and you guys have been married for how long?
Almost 17.
Yeah, we got married the first year I was on the job.
Oh wow. Okay, so you've lived this life. You're not a newbie. No. Because I often wonder, when we were talking about first responders, and we're talking about how maybe somebody is a new volunteer firefighter, or maybe they're new to the department, and maybe they've just gotten married. Maybe they're a first-time firefighter, or they're a firefighter and they've just gotten married. And you're in leadership, so Randy, this may be from your perspective too. But what do you know, because there's a lot of this, and one of the things we talk about very often when we talk about people that have had cardiac events is that depression is very common. Did you go through any of that after your event?
Yeah, but it was more, it wasn't like where it was like a constant state of like, I would just have like, bad days or like be upset, because it was such a, like our routine every day when I was off was she works at the gym. So we would go to the gym from 9 to 12, and Nora would go play in the gym with the other kids. And I would get, I'd go run or go lift weights or do whatever while she's working. And then all of a sudden I couldn't do that. I could, but I couldn't do it like I was doing it. And that was really hard for me to deal with, or having to listen to everybody say, oh my God, you're so lucky. Oh my, or, right. If, I pick up like, a paper bag at the store. Are you sure you can do that? Right. Are you okay? Like, yes, man, I got it.
Or you're never going to be able to travel again. You're never going to be able to do this.
You're never going to be able to do that. I actually had like one person, and to this day, I've never said anything to him, but I was laying in the hospital bed in the ICU and have some, I could hear someone say, oh, that guy's, his career's over. Like, and I don't, they didn't mean that like in a bad way, but I just remember thinking to myself, first of all, no, you don't, nobody knows that. And just, having people put limitations on you, kind of, it gets in your head. And so I would have bad days or bad times, but, I kind of, between her and the munchkins running around, kind of changed that. And then, getting to meet you guys and doing what we did down there was a big help.
Part of what we wanted to do was to also address the spouses of the first responders. And you guys have been walking this journey for 17 years. And of course, it seems like, as Randy said, only in the last maybe couple of years has mental health become a priority when we're talking about these things. I think we do. We do see you guys, Randy, as big tough firefighters or police. That's how we visualize. You're the heroes. You got everything but a cape on, and but you're still human beings. You still hurt. You still, it's anguish. But for Katie, and it may be a husband or it may be a wife that's dealing with it, depending upon the first responder. But when Randy comes home, and this has been over the course of your marriage, how have you been involved in those conversations and helping him and dealing with it yourself, knowing what he has experienced?
Well, I always just let him talk about any call. I start out by saying, how was your shift when he comes home? And then if he says they had a terrible call or something, I let him tell me about it. And then if he doesn't want to keep talking about it, I don't push the issue about what else happened or what kind of calls did you have. It usually comes up in conversations. And then sometimes when he was closer, I would hear about the call. Now that he's over in a different state, I don't hear as much of the calls, but when he was closer, I would know what would happen. Just
small town.
Yeah. And so sometimes I would say, were you on that call, or did you run that accident? And so I would just happen to ask, and that would lead to a little more conversation than before. But he's a talker, so usually I would get it.
He's a pretty open book. He likes to share. Whenever you bring on a new firefighter, maybe they're just right out of training, and this is their first stint. How do you prepare the firefighter and maybe even their spouse or significant others for what to expect and how to process and how to deal with what they're going to experience? Because it's one thing to be in training, it's another thing to be face to face with these things.
And the biggest thing is, and it was hard for her, is just the time commitment. Because before I was a paid fireman, I would work 10-hour days, and then I would go to the firehouse for 3 or 4 hours, and then I would show up at her house at 10 o'clock at night and be like, hey, let's hang out. And I'm sure she felt like, great, I get to see you for 35 minutes today. And and then when I became a paid fireman, I was gone for 24 hours, and that was an adjustment too, just because she lived here and she didn't have any family here, and it was just kind of by herself. And I think that's the biggest thing I was trying to tell people when I had a friend of mine, he actually just got married, and he's a paid fireman now, and he joined our volunteer house as a like a 22-year-old kid and a 20-year-old kid, and started dating this girl, and said, I think I'm gonna get married to her. And I was like, does she know what she's getting into? Because you're gonna be you get a paid fireman's job, you're not home every night, and it's a lot of time away. So you have to be able to you got to be able to trust that they're taking care of everything at home when you're not there. And that's the hard part with the stress, because one, I like that she's not in the fire service and she doesn't know anything about the fire service other than what she sees on TV. But because if I have an issue, I'll ask her a question and I'll get an impartial answer. I won't get an answer from someone who has a whatever. And so I do that a lot with, like, if I have to discipline someone, I'll just ask her what she thinks, because she has no idea, one, who these people are, and or about any kind of backstory. And it's good to have like a partner in that understands what I'm going through, but is not subject matter expert to kind of sway whatever I'm feeling too. She's ultimate support.
So mental health conditions are no different than any other physical illness. They're no different. A mental health condition is no different than my thyroid condition or my heart condition or anything else like that, because my brain is part of my body. And I think a really, really important one. We can argue about which is the most, important organ. I'm right up there with the brain. So They're physical illnesses, but they do affect the way a person may think, act, or feel. Not all of them, but some of the more serious ones, of course. And, and one of the things I want you to really remember is that mental health conditions are common and they're treatable. 1 in 4 adults, 1 in 5 youth live with a diagnosable mental health condition. That is 20% of adults and 20% of youth and 25% of adults. So we don't usually have to travel too far down our family tree to find somebody who's, living with some anxiety or a little bit of depression, or, has some other issue that is a legitimate mental health condition. Here is what they are not. They are not anyone's fault. I am not a bad mom because my son lives with a mental health condition. He's not a bad guy because he lives with a mental health condition. These are equal opportunity disorders, and they can touch anyone. They're also not limiting. You can achieve your goals. So if you live with some depression, you live with some anxiety, and you have this goal to, get to a certain place, it doesn't mean that that is not going to happen. So, all righty. So now we're going to talk a little bit about, on the next slide, signs and symptoms. What do they look like? So a lot of these, we all experience from time to time. It is 2 words I want you to remember is intensity and duration. So anything that's kind of like 2 weeks or beyond or super intense might be a red flag that something's going on. So severe, out of control, we all feel sad every once in a while. If we lose a loved one, we lose a pet, we have a fight or something with a loved one. I mean, that can cause us to feel sad, cause us to be withdrawn. It goes on, and it does, it interferes with you living your normal, doing some of your daily things. Then it's kind of becomes an issue if it's dragging on. Severe and out of control risk-taking behavior. Now that can really affect some of our first responders. You know better than to do certain things, maybe in a safe or unsafe way. And if you're acting sort of rashly, that could be a little bit of a red flag. Driving way too fast when you shouldn't be driving way too fast. Sudden overwhelming fear for no reason, could be a panic attack. You could be shopping at a grocery store. All of a sudden you have this rapid heart rate. You're thinking you're having a heart attack. Could be a legitimate panic attack. Okay, so that's something you need to address with someone. Severe mood swings, up and down, a little too much. We all have these mood swings, but if it's happening a lot and if it's continuing and it is intense, that's a red flag. Drastic changes in behavior, personality, or sleep habits. Those sleep habits can be a real trigger for things that will, trickle down into all sorts of other things. But if you're seeing that happening and it's going on for several weeks, that could be a real red flag. Extreme difficulty concentrating and staying still. We think automatically of ADHD, but that could be a sign of some other issues as well. But that's usually a red flag that something needs to be addressed. Intense worries or fears, that could be a sign of having anxiety disorder or OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. Eating, not eating, throwing up, using laxatives to lose weight, that could indicate that you have anorexia or bulimia, an eating disorder going on. So those could be signs of wanting to have more control over certain things. And, that's definitely a very dangerous situation. Repeated use of drugs or alcohol. Oftentimes, folks will try, they'll use drugs or alcohol to self-medicate. Well, I'm really feeling down. Maybe if I have this drink or use, this substance, that'll really buoy me up. But that's really not the answer to any of these questions or concerns. You need to really sort of face these issues and not, try to smooth them over with, or think they're going to go away if you have, alcohol or drugs. Obviously, this is huge. Trying to harm or kill oneself, making plans to do so, so any self-harm issues. But if you're planning to kill yourself or making plans to do so or have a previous attempt, those are red flags that you really want to make sure you're supporting someone and getting them the help they need. Next slide. Okay, so the facts that I'm going to be giving you are actually facts that we've gotten from the CDC, that's the Center for Disease Control and Disease Control and Prevention. American Foundation for Suicide and Prevention, and the National Institute of Mental Health. So this is where these kinds of these facts come from. So suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the US, which is more common than homicide. You know, that's really that, when I first heard that, I was surprised. These next two statistics don't really relate to our first responders, but a lot of our first responders and you as spouses of first responders have, you know, potentially have family. So it's the first cause of death for our kids ages 10 to 14, second leading cause of death for ages 15 through 24. Studies suggest that over 90% of those who have who die by suicide had at least one diagnosable mental health condition at the time of their death. Now, more specific suicide facts for you would be the next slide, and they would be that according to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, healthcare workers, physicians, and nurses have the highest rates of burnout, depressive symptoms, and suicide risk than anybody in the general population. So that's why we really need to make sure that we're there for our frontline and first responders with all this information. First responders attempt suicide at a rate 10 times the general population. That is enormous, right? So we want to make sure there's that safety net under our loved ones. Additionally, first responders and law enforcement officers are more likely to die by suicide than in their regular line of duty job tasks. So that's, again, really, really something we want to be aware of. Shift work, as we know, long hours, double shifts, PTSD, depression, anxiety, substance use, they can all lead to lead to suicide or having suicidal ideation. And this is another one that's pretty significant, is that the highest rate of suicides are among middle-aged white men. So that's another big, risk factor. So these are all things that we want to make sure that you're aware of, that we do talk about suicide and that we are aware of these facts. Next slide. So what do we do if we I'm seeing some of these warning signs that Betsey just talked about. So in red, I have immediate attention is needed if somebody is talking about not being there tomorrow. Hey, this is going to be the last time you have to deal with this. Being a burden to others, having to lean on someone too much, or you're not going to have to worry about this anymore. Having no reason to live. If they're saying things like that, that's a huge red flag. So obviously looking for ways to attempt suicide, thinking about ways that you might end your life. Feeling hopeless, desperate, or trapped, another big indicator. Giving away possessions. This is one that's kind of, it's so subtle, but it's so important. You have somebody that you know that's a law enforcement officer or a firefighter or EMT, and they absolutely love their car, or they love their gaming system, or they love something else, and they give that to you. That is a big red flag that, they're sort of willing their things away already. If they're behaving recklessly, so they're driving way too fast, they're running into that building when they really don't, they know better than to do it in that situation. So they're behaving recklessly. In other words, it's okay if I die, this is okay. So those are things that we need to really be watching for. And so what do we do? On the next slide, when these things are happening, you take you take action immediately, and you ask the question. Asking the question is not going to plant an idea in their head. You want to ask them if they're thinking about suicide or hurting themselves. You want to just kind of get that conversation started. You don't leave them alone unless, of course, they're, going to get in the car and drive 80 miles an hour. That is a time when you wouldn't jump in the car with them. You can call the National Suicide Lifeline. This is a number that I think everybody should have on their cell phone. You can go to the emergency room with them if they'll go, or call 911 to get some help to bring that person that you love and that you're worried that they might be thinking of ending their life. There's a South Carolina mobile community crisis unit that is available to you. You can call that number and they will triage over the phone. And then if they feel that a visit, a personal face-to-face visit is needed, they will come out to you and they will have a law enforcement escort just to make sure everybody is safe. There's a crisis text line. You can just be looking at your cell phone and you can be saying, I'm really worried about this person that I love. It's anonymous. You can just be texting and getting some helpful information. Whatever you do, don't dismiss the concerns. And also at this point, just as being precautious or taking some, taking preventive and, just being prepared. At that point, you want to have all medications and firearms locked away. You want to take all the precautions you need to keep everybody safe. And you can't pretend that this will go away if we don't talk about it. I know for some of us, it's like, I can't believe this is happening, or I feel this is going to happen. I can't really think about it. It's not that time to do that. We can't pretend that these things are going to go away. All right. And our next slide is Sarah. She's the spouse of a law enforcement officer in the Charleston area. She's the mother of 2 and a volunteer chaplain for first responders and law enforcement. And here's our interview with Sarah. Well, welcome to Sarah from the Charleston area. And I'm going to have her introduce herself more completely and tell us a little bit about how she's connected to a law enforcement officer and a little bit more about what she does.
Well, hello, my name is Sarah Craven. I have been the wife of a law enforcement officer for 17 years. My husband has been in law enforcement for just over 18 years. And we have grown together in that we consider it our law enforcement history together. I'm also a volunteer with the Coastal Crisis Chaplaincy here in the Low Country of South Carolina. We cover 3 counties. And in those counties, we are available for all call outs, whether it be a death or a suicide or an auto vehicle accident. We go out and we deliver a ministry of presence to both the law enforcement and first responders, as well as the families on scene. So that has just encouraged my husband and I in our growth together and impacting law enforcement couples for health and mental health and everything included in that.
Well, that's really important. And, you don't think about that, but that must have really tied you into, okay, enforcement officer. Your life sort of changes because you've got now all of a sudden, this is perhaps your chosen career as well. You've got to change a little bit.
And he comes home, I'm able to debrief him to a certain level, sort of talk through what's going on. But at the same time, when I have a difficult call with the chaplaincy, he's always here when I return home as well. So we've been able to find a way to communicate that many police officers and law enforcement officers do not have in their lives. And so we do see it as a blessing.
Talk about some of the stress that you experienced and how you've learned to cope. When your husband's maybe out for 2 or 3 days, or how do your holidays always look, or maybe not look, those kinds of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, our very first Christmas, he graduated in January of 1 year. So we had a whole year together. He had worked all the major holidays and that was okay. We were young. We didn't have any kids. I was working EMS at the time, so our schedules were off. But that first Christmas morning, I thought I was Superwoman and I was just going to get up and soar through it without any emotions. It was okay. I was a law enforcement wife. And my in-laws actually came to pick me up and drive me to the family dinner. And as I was sitting in the back of that van, I realized how painful it was to have this major holiday away from my husband. And the other thing that just impacted me so deeply was his mother, who was sitting in the seat in front of me. She had tears in her eyes as well. And so that was eye-opening for me very early on about the importance of extended family and considering them and not just shutting ourselves off in our own little holiday world. And I would say that it was, semi-easy for the first 10 years. We didn't have any children. We could adapt. There were many meals shared in the police car, or I would do ride-alongs and just find time. Once our children were born, holidays took a dramatic turn. Being a DUI officer meant he was working every major holiday. But holidays are the hardest. You feel like a widow. You feel like weddings, holidays, you're there by yourself. When kids are there, it's even more difficult. And in the long run, it's something you start to get used to, but it's also something that just kind of feels unfair. But as we honor our first responders and our law enforcement officers, we honor them in that sacrifice that they're making for others. Of that communication, I know that a lot of law enforcement officers are so scared to share their daily life with their families because they are afraid that will build into their fear. But what I found is the more he opened up and the more we were able to communicate, and he didn't have to give me all the gory details. But what I needed was that everything was okay when he walked back into my house, or when he started heading home, that I just got that I'm good and we're coming home. And
This new social unrest that I think has just ballooned. I mean, it's been there for years, but it's really taken on a life of its own without us getting political at all. There's this new stress that you worry about with, just political stuff that is bringing people out and potentially could make their job a little more scary and life-threatening. Plus there's COVID out there now, and so what, typically your spouse would probably be like, okay, so I'm going home now. Now, is there some stress in his life? I'm going home now, and maybe I'm bringing something that I don't want to bring home to my loved ones. Is there any of that you're seeing? And if there's any advice on how to sort of tamp all that down and keep it from just becoming toxic stress for the family?
Well, yes, absolutely. I think when COVID first started, there was that daily fear that we didn't know what was coming. And a lot of us had jobs that we could do from home. Of course, law enforcement, you can't do from home. You have to be somewhere. And I was out very early as a chaplain praying with the different groups in masks, trying to strengthen them for going out. But then I was also sending my husband out in a mask every day. There was high stress for him on how to keep his civilian employees and the deputies under him safe. So that was a stress level that went through the roof. Then there was the, what could I possibly bring home to my family? Who am I coming in contact with? And as the time went on, what I saw in the law enforcement community was that we tightened in with each other because we all knew that we were all taking the risk together. And so I was watching Ferguson, and it was the first time that I felt personal fear and insecurity in who I was. 20 years ago when we started this journey, we all wore thin blue line t-shirts. We had them on our car. We took our cars to dinner. It was not an issue that we felt safety-wise for our families. And I've watched that develop over the years, and to come to a point where we have to sit down and talk with our children and say, not everybody is excited that daddy's a police officer.
Have any parting thoughts or best advice? I know when we talked in the summer, you had, and I think Michael had even talked about this too, the financial, there's like, okay, so, Michael speaks to this and says, whatever you do, don't count that overtime into as you're planning your budget for rent and food and babies and diapers and, vacations, because that is not something you can consistently count on.
I think the money is a huge thing. I think you have to be very careful. We fell into that pit, and we are slowly climbing out of it. Of a new class, I'd say, please make sure you're called to this. Make sure it's not just something you want to do in the meantime. Make sure it's not, oh, well, I've now, left military and this is the closest thing to it, because they're actually not very much alike at all. And if you are receiving that calling and you have a loved one, someone you are going to be married to, or even if it's just your parents, make sure that they understand that it's a calling, that it's not just a job.
Last thing I would like you to tell me is, what are some of the coping strategies that you use for your self-care?
So I have always been an anxious person. I think I can remember all the way back to age 4 or 5. So I personally am medicated for my anxiety. It helps balance me. I believe that my brain just needs a little extra help balancing, and I'm okay with that. And I love speaking to both my psychiatrist and my counselor. Counseling specifically here in the Low Country is so available and so on point that it almost feels silly not to use it, because it is free, it's accessible. But I also understand there's this huge stigma about if I admit I have a problem to my department, they might pull me from where I am, I might lose my job. What if I need to go on a medication for a little bit for anxiety? What if I need to be on long-term for anxiety? And so we also, because, like I said earlier, because who we are, we make sure we debrief that first night. Our suicide rate is on the rise. Our alcoholism rate is on the rise. Law enforcement families are seeking ways to numb that pain. And I think part of the civil unrest that we're going through has helped us actually say, hey, listen, let's check in on the mental health of our officers. Let's make sure that they're mentally stable where they can go out and deal with a suicidal person, deal with a domestic. It's one of the deadliest calls you can go on, and you have to be on your toes and clear-minded when you go on a domestic. That they might not talk through it, make sure they're talking to someone. Make sure they're drinking a lot of water. Make sure they're eating whole meals, because when they're on the road, they're eating Snickers bars and hamburgers. So making sure, and I'm not, make sure you have a meal on the table. That's definitely not the kind of woman I am, but making sure that there is healthy food, healthy choices, watching alcohol intake. It's all important. But it all goes back to the communication. If you just one day say, hey, guess what? I think you're drinking too much alcohol, and haven't built up the communication to that part, it can be difficult. So,
well, thank you so much for your time. Okay, so we're going to quickly go through some self-care because we're running a bit late, and I apologize for that. For those of you who thought we were going to be just 1 hour, I'm so sorry. Self-care for family members. Okay, so one of the things I want you to do is learn some skills to, like, tamp down your stress level when things are really scary. Like, maybe you're waiting for your loved one to come home or whatever, and, you're stressed. So you can focus yourself by thinking about a different category of food, animals, the alphabet. I know my son tries to name football teams that are in the NFL. That's what he does, is he's taking himself down. Think of a room in your house and name 10 things in your room, and then try to visualize one, visualize each one. Sheila said yesterday, well, that might cause stress because you might be wanting to rearrange once you've thought about the room. But, just those are some cool ways to sort of just de-stress. The next one is relaxing yourself. You can tense each muscle group in your body for about 10 seconds and then release, and you can just feel the tension leave your body. Okay, the next slide is just a little bit about what we do. Again, I want to let you know that we're here for you, that the education for all of this is key to your understanding. We have support groups for family members that meet every single Tuesday night at 6:30, and we can find, you can, on the next slide, after the one with resources, it'll tell you how you can reach us and get all the information about support groups, either through our website or through a call to us or our Facebook page. So the last page I want to show you before we go on to questions is our resources. And this is just a wonderful page for you to have available. A lot of these, most of these are 24/7 lines that you can access and get some help if you have an issue. So now we're going to just open it up to questions.
So I'm going to jump in here, Betsy, while people are trying to type in and ask some of the questions. We did have them in the chat box.
Great.
So one of the first questions that we got right off the bat was, why do you think people don't talk about their mental health in the workplace?
Well, that that is stigma. I mean, there's a lot of stigma that still surrounds mental health conditions. People think they're going to be, they're going to be judged. We all have preconceived notions about people that are different than us sometimes. And, sadly, that's the case. It's just this preconceived notion that we are going to be different. We're going to be judged. We're going to be treated differently. We're going to be lesser than, in people's minds. And the good news about having these discussions, as Michael mentioned, he had this really open discussion with, a couple of the people in his office and his lieutenant and another sergeant, and they were all taking medication for anxiety. We're all talking about it. It's becoming a little more normalized. There is a lot of stigma, especially in these types of professions, because people know they need to be ready to go. And, that's one of the things that's still holding people back. But like I said, 1 in 4 adults, 1 in 5 youth. I mean, and it doesn't mean that, you can kind of think about your office or, being in the movie theater. Remember when that used to happen? But when we'd be in a movie theater and it was completely full and you use that number 1 in 4, it's like, oh my gosh, look at all the people that would be in this room that live with some sort of mental health condition. You kind of have to put a visual to it. But if you're in your precinct or you're at your, firehouse or whatever, and you remember those numbers, some people there are struggling or hopefully getting some help for the things that they do need help for.
So one of the last questions that we have, and there's some in between, but I'm going to jump to one of the last questions simply because it kind of bounces off of that. What happens if my spouse is fired for opening up about their mental health? This is a real fear for us. So what suggestions do you have for somebody who is feeling that kind of pressure?
That is really a tough position to be in. That really is a tough position to be in. I would think that in all of our professions, there would be a way for you to have some sort of, some sort of advocate or assistance that could help with that. Clearly, if you have a more serious type of a mental health condition, you might have to take, be on disability for a particular period of time. But I would think that everybody should have, we never should close a door on anybody that has, there'd be like, I have heart disease, and nobody fired me because I had to have, a major surgical procedure on my heart. I mean, and your brain is just as important, if not more important, than all the other organs that, run the show. So I think that it's really sad. And I think that some of these other resources that we have on this resource page, they can be the ones to go to say, hey, you know what? I have this issue and I'm so afraid to be open about it because I'm so afraid to be fired. And so maybe they can give you some tools. I don't have the answer to that question, but somebody in here, these peer-to-peer kind of calls, cop to cop, other places that you can call, they would be able to really direct you to where you need to go.
Okay, that's great advice. Thank you. And they're all going to get the PDF of the resources and
yes.
Yeah, okay. So there was another one here. In Michael Ackerman's story, he mentioned spouses and families didn't sign up for this. This is so true. Sometimes it can bring up feelings of anxiety and frustration. What can I do to manage that while supporting a spouse?
Good question.
Well, really good. So like Michael said, we did not, this is our calling, not necessarily your calling. You didn't come along for this whole ride. So what you have to do is you have to kind of find ways to take care of yourself because you love your spouse, so is it that you have to go to, like Sarah did? Sarah said, hey, you know what? I need a little something to help me a little bit here. Does not mean that she's not still able to be a chaplain, a mother to her children, a loving spouse to her husband. But she needed a little something because things were a little too stressful. And so talking to your primary care physician, going to a support group, getting therapy for yourself, having your own therapist is wonderful. These are wonderful things. Communication is so key. We heard that in every single one of those 3 videos. We talked about how important communication skills are. That means for that spouse, that loved one, that family member, they need to be open and get their story out. Talk about things that they're concerned about. That maybe their spouse might not understand because they're in a different place, with their career. But it kind of helps you to be a little more understanding and maybe find some hobbies or things that you can do so you're not so enmeshed. But I mean, those are some things that are real helpful. Is it medication? Maybe. Is it therapy? Always a good thing to have somebody to talk to. Have some friends that you can talk to that, would be a really good outlet for you. And again, we all have to learn those listening skills, practice those listening skills.
Bouncing off of that one again and jumping a couple of questions, it's like, so that kind of meshes into what other ways can I educate myself about mental health support systems?
Okay, so there's several things that we can do. NAMI, Piedmont Tri-County, has a course called Family to Family. It's a free course like all of our things, and it's an 8-session course, and we talk about everything from what are mental health conditions, how does the brain work, why do these things happen, communication skills, some different tools and different exercises we do as a big group, and everything is confidential. So you don't have to say who you are or who you're married to or where you're employed or anything like that, or where your loved one is employed, but these are for family members of adults that live with a mental health condition. And this is just an awesome course. Also, there is a course that we can connect you to. It's an 8-hour course called Mental Health First Aid. It's a little different than what we do, but it's still a lot of excellent information. And so you would just have to look at both of those and see which one fits your schedule, fits your need. The support groups are going to be key. If you feel a little uncomfortable going to a support group here locally, well, we can have you, especially in the world of virtual right now, we could tap you into some support groups that are in different parts of the state if you feel like, I really want to be even more, supported, but more confidential. There's lots of things that we can do.
Okay. I was going to say, would that be the end? And can you take these questions and maybe answer them on the PDF?
I don't know how you want to handle that, Sheila, because I'm sure that we've had our folks on for a bit. So
120, so.
Yeah. So what we will do is we'll email out a PDF of those resources. We are going to go back, since we had some technical difficulties at the first of this, Betsey and I are going to go back and we're going to re-record this webinar, which will be available on the YouTube channels, both with the Heart2Heart Foundation and NAMI Piedmont Tri-County. So you'll be able to find them there. We also have, you'll notice we were only able to fit in about, 11, 12 minutes of those interviews. Each one of those interviews is about 30 minutes long. The conversations with Michael, Randy, Katie, and Sarah were fabulous. So you're also going to be able to access the complete interviews that we had with our special guest today. And we're also, Betsey and I are going to be sending you some information in the mail, which was why we asked for your home address. We're going to send some resources to you from NAMI Piedmont Tri-County. I'm also going to send you a copy of our Pumped Up, Get Pumped Up for Your Heart Health book, since Heart Month is a short couple of weeks away. And we are going to repeat this webinar. This is the first one that we offered, but we are going to repeat it again in February on Thursday, February the 18th at 7 p.m. in the evening. That way, if anybody missed it, they weren't able to join at noon, they'll have another opportunity where they can participate. So the last question that I have for Betsey that I wanted to ask was that during our conversations, putting the Saving the Saviors program together, one of the things that you and I have talked about is among our first responder families, the spouses, significant others, caregivers, if there's an interest for a support group specifically for this population, for those first responder families. Is that something that NAMI Piedmont Tri-County or NAMI in general would be interested in pursuing?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We want to be able to meet people where, we want to meet you where you're needing us. So we don't want people struggling. So if we don't have what you need, we'll find what you need, and then we'll try to replicate it so that we can meet you locally with the things you need. But yeah, we want to be able to, if there's enough interest for spouses, family members of first responders, and frontline staff in general, we want to be able to help you deal with some of the challenges.
Awesome. So that's what we will work towards. So if that's something that any of you on the call that you're interested in, you can respond back to the email sent out to you for this webinar, and we'll make sure that we get that information to you. And as soon as the recorded version of this is available, we'll send you a link as well so that you can share it. There may be some people, like we said, that could not be on the call for whatever reason, but they'll be able to watch the replay of this. And thank you for your patience as we walk through. We used to have a saying in television, it was always a button or a switch. And on my case, it was a button that hadn't been clicked yet with Zoom webinars, but I'm glad we were able to get those interviews into you. So on behalf of the Heart2Heart Foundation, our Saving the Saviors team, you can find more information on our website. And of course, Betsey O'Brien with NAMI Piedmont Tri-County. Thank you all so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Be looking out for those emails, and if there's anything that we can do for any of you, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. In the meantime, stay heart healthy. Have a great day.